John Barr, the Paisley weaver who wove the first cloth in pioneer Dunedin and lived out his days in the settlement's own Little Paisley.
John Barr was born at Paisley in Renfrewshire in 1806, and like most of the people in his extended circle, he grew up to become a weaver, the trade with which Paisley had become so strongly identified by the 19th century. In 1830, he married Elizabeth Stewart from the neighbouring parish, and by 1841, they were living here in Williamsburgh, a dormitory village just to the east of Paisley on the road to Glasgow. All of their neighbours were weavers too, but times were tough. In the early 1840s, Paisley was hit hard by an economic crisis and most of its mills were shut down. Fully a quarter of the population was left dependent on poor relief. The future can't have looked too bright, and John and Elizabeth must have weighed the future prospects of their growing family with considerable anxiety. The idea of a new life and great opportunities in faraway New Zealand must have appealed as one way out of their dilemma.
The Barrs weren't the only weavers whose interest was sparked by promotion of the Otago settlement scheme in Paisley in the late 1840s.
When the Philip Lang left Greenock in November 1847, there were 4 Paisley weaving families aboard: the Barrs, the Gillies, the Marshalls and the Patricks. Not one of these skilled tradesmen recorded his occupation as a weaver on the passenger manifest, however. They all signed on as labourers, ready to do whatever was required to build a pioneer community in Dunedin. Altogether, there were 28 people in this Paisley group, adults, teenagers and children, so they made up a sizable cluster in the small population of just a couple of hundred in the embryonic settlement of Dunedin. And that distinctiveness was further enhanced when they all built themselves first houses, wattle and daub cottages in fact, in a row here in a part of town that became known, not surprisingly, as Little Paisley.
This painting by Edward Abbott, one of Kettle's original survey party, shows a view looking from Little Paisley towards Dunedin in 1849, depicting a rather idealised version of what Dunedin looked like at that early point. If we could spin the view around to look at Little Paisley itself, the reality would have been quite a bit humbler for the Paisley families.
Their men and boys were busy scratching out a living, mostly working as day labourers for the Reverend Thomas Burns, according to entries in his diary. Their women, meanwhile, were making homes out of those little cottages here in Little Paisley. But gradually, as each family scraped together enough money to buy their own piece of land, they moved off the hill and away. All except for John Barr. After a stint as Dunedin's first jailer, another as the man in charge of the local pound, he became Captain Cargill's right-hand man and totally dedicated to the Otago leader's service. And when his boss built a new house at Hillside, just across the road from the present Southern Cemetery, Barr opted to stay exactly where he'd started. He replaced his original little whare with a proper wooden cottage, which he called Mavis Bank, a name that also came to be synonymous with and an alternative to Little Paisley.
Here it is in an undated photo, with John Barr himself seated at centre and with some of the female members of his family fashionably attired. And here is another hand-coloured version from a different angle.
Now, quite apart from its interest as a pioneer launchpad, this area has a particular piece of historic significance because it was here that John Barr got a local cabinet maker to make him a hand loom, and he wove the very first cloth to be made in Dunedin in 1853. And as it happens, we still have 2 shuttles from that loom in the Toitu collection.
And we can see here Barr's advertisement in the Otago Witness touting his forthcoming production after the harvest, when he's prepared to take orders. James Barr, Otago's pioneer historian, but no relation as far as I can work out, writes in his 1879 history of the Dunedin settlement that the tweeds which he produced were very much liked and pronounced to be the very article of wear that was suitable to the place. But encouragement failed, and it took 20 years for Otago to get up the requisite patriotism for the support of a manufactory. Another account describes Barr at work, his feet shifting regularly the treadles, his hands moving the beam and plying the shuttle, his eye watching for any flaw in the yarn, and his tongue detailing a yarn of another sort. The visitor was both instructed and amused.
In 1858, the area around Little Paisley was selected to become the site for Dunedin's second cemetery. John Barr offered his services to be its sexton, and he won the job. Well, it would have been a short commute because John and his wife Elizabeth remained here in Little Paisley, living in that cottage until his death in 1873. When they died, they were buried not far from the original cottage, just alongside John's old boss, Captain Cargill. But their son William, who'd become the Mayor of Mornington, did one better. He was buried exactly here on the spot where that cottage's hearthstone had been.